Father Chad Ripperger,
Nice to finally meet you.
welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's nice to finally meet you. We've been trying to get you on for over a year and finally made it happen. So thank you for coming. It's an honor to have you.
Well, likewise.
But I want to get right into it. So right before we started recording here, we had a little side discussion about UFOs and aliens.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what do you think about all of that?
Well, obviously, some of the UFOs can be explained by some of them by governmental experiments and things of that sort, which people are not necessarily used to. However, usually when you get into stuff like the abduction cases and things like that, I actually did a conference on this more recently, where I parse out 10 different ways in which, if you actually look at like abduction scenarios, that in point in fact, those abduction scenarios, if you actually look at what the aliens are supposedly doing, is identical to the same things that demons do to people who are possessed. So if you strip the veneer of the alien aspect of it off, that in point in fact what you're dealing with is they're just demons. There's actually a book too, I don't know if you've heard about it, it's called Alien Intrusion by Gary Bates. And in that book, first of all, he debunks a lot of the sightings that people have actually, the footage and the things of that sort. It's a bit dated of a book, but in there he talks about the fact that, too, that people who are in these abduction situations will actually cry out to Jesus, and then boom, all of a sudden the abduction situation stops and they're sitting back in their bed or whatever the case actually is. So there's a lot of demonic stuff on that level. There's some that speculate, too, that some of the craft that we see moving in ways that are contrary to physical laws is also just a diabolic mirage, which they can cause. That type of stuff is extraordinarily rare because God doesn't usually permit it, but that can actually happen. So that's kind of just my general thoughts in relationship to it, that a lot of this stuff, not all of it, but a lot of this stuff is just diabolic in nature.
What does God say about it? Does God say that we are the only beings in the universe?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we don't have absolute certitude other than the fact of what we read in Genesis. So in the book of Genesis, the creation of life is actually restricted or seems to be focused here on Earth and nowhere else. My own basic observation is, if you look at what NASA is doing in their studies and things like that, everywhere they look, they think, oh, we might have found life. We might have, and then they didn't, of course. And I think what we're discovering is that other than here, the universe is sterile. Now, in theory, God can do whatever he wants, but at least from a scriptural point of view, but then also even science, I think, is starting to prove it out too, is that we're getting to the point where we're starting to realize that this seems to be the only place that you're going to, that it seems to be the case. A lot of times too, the idea that there's life elsewhere is heavily rooted in the evolutionary hypothesis, because there's evolution here, there must be everywhere, even though their theories of evolution are not only just scientifically problematic, but just even theologically and philosophically problematic. But that all being said, that's where it's rooted in, I think.
With all I'm sure you've seen some of the Epstein stuff. Have you been following that at all?
A bit, from a distance, yeah.
That seems like some type of satanic ritualistic type stuff that was going on there.
Yes, actually. And actually, the stuff I've read about, as far as to the degree that I can have certitude about what you can find on the internet, the stuff that was going on there, and just the layout of the island gives an indication that it was heavily involved in the occult. The other thing I should mention too is that people don't get heavy into that type of thing. It's the same thing that we've seen elsewhere, where guys who suffer from homosexuality and they're active and they're very heavily active, it very often degenerates into ritualistic sex. It's the same kind of a thing there, that it eventually degenerates. Satan ends up just driving them because they're so disordered that he gets involved, and then he drives it more towards a ritualistic kind of an approach. So if it wasn't ritualistic, I'd be surprised.
I mean, there's just so many questions about what's going on, and it seems like nobody high up, nobody that could actually do something about this is going to. In fact, they're just trying to cover it up. In fact, our mutual friend who brought you here today, I mean, we've had a handful of discussions about distractions and all the distractions that are going to come to try to take our eye off of the
Yeah.
satanic ritualistic abuse that Epstein did
Right.
and all of his people that were involved with him.
Right.
And before any of this came out, our friend said, I think it'll be aliens. And then,
Yeah.
and then,
Then and there.
and then we see former President Barack Obama go on some random podcast and say, "Oh yeah, aliens are real." And I brought this up. I've been really angry about this stuff, and I went up to our oak tree and did a little rant about it and said, you think this is a coincidence that they're all of a sudden former president goes on a random podcast that nobody's ever heard of and says that aliens are real right in the middle of the biggest, most elite pedophile ring in the entire world while that's being
Blown up.
unfolded.
Right.
And then you fast forward about a week, and of course, then President Trump comes out and says something about, what President Obama did was illegal. He shouldn't be talking about aliens. I don't know the exact quote, but he came on and said that. And then I have former guests that have been on the show, some of them that I've been trying to get on the show that haven't come, that are in the alien UFO anomalous activity, realm, and they're saying, oh, look at this. Oh, look, maybe the Epstein stuff is a distraction from the alien UFO. And to me, that is no way. Like, right. I am not taking my eye off of that ball. Don't try to distract me with this bullshit. And I mean, what do you think about that?
I totally agree with you. Actually, for this particular reason, there's kind of a bit of a backstory. So one of the tactics that the demons always use and very often use, is they rarely do a frontal assault on a particular individual. What they'll do is, and this is a diversionary tactic, which being a military man, you would be able to appreciate this. You're over here, you just lob bombs over here, so the people's focus goes over here. And what that does is that gives you the ability to maintain your activity over here and maintain your influence. So the demons will very often, so for example, one of the things that we commonly see is it's a demon of fear that actually drives things like sins against the sixth commandment, pornography, and things of that sort. So you'll drive the person to do that. But the real root problem is a demon of fear. So once you address the demon of fear, then this stuff just clears out. Well, this same type of tactic is actually going on. They want you to not pay attention to what's really going on or what's really in the background, because that's where their vulnerability is, at least in the relationship to the diabolic. So it has that same kind of a complexion. So you've got this situation where the Epstein stuff starts to kind of come to the surface, and then all of a sudden there's this diversionary tactic that's used to get everybody, because now virtually nobody's talking about Epstein. So you just get that diversionary tactic over here. And, as you know, the American people have, not a lot of American people have the memory of a goldfish, which is like 11 seconds. So as soon as you've got them looking at this thing, now they're paying attention to this. And of course, the whole alien things, I think, is just a ruse anyway. It's just a way for people to get focused and interested on that. On the other hand, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the world elite didn't want to use the alien things from the point of view of, if you listen to the people who have been alienly abducted, it's always like the aliens are always telling them, oh yeah, we're here to save humanity. Well, that's Jesus Christ's role, not aliens. We're here because human beings can't save themselves, and we're here to basically usher in a new era. Yeah, that's because the elites want to get away from or at least the demons want to get away from Christianity as the ruling ethos that affects, the world cultures, etc. So the very same things that the demons actually want is the same type of stuff that you hear the aliens actually talking about and going into. So for me, it just looks like a diabolic diversionary tactic, not necessarily in the sense that the people that are doing this diversionary tactic, the human beings doing this, are thinking that, that they're thinking in terms of diabolic necessarily in doing this. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that the demons can't be using them precisely to that end, because the demons do not want people to become focused on the moral degeneracy, because then they'll start demanding change, and the demons don't want the change. They want this degeneracy because it empowers them.
You mentioned demon of fear.
Yeah.
What is the demon of fear?
Technically speaking, it's actually Beelzebub, which, as you know from your interviews with Dan, it's the Lucifer and Beelzebub and Satan are the same demon, and he's the demon of fear because of the fact that fear is defined as the perception of a future evil over which you cannot overcome. So there's some evil that's coming down the pike. You see it coming, and intellectually, and you can't get away from it. Well, in my dealings with him, he says he lives in Beelzebub says he lives in chronic fear. And the reason he lives in chronic fear, he said, is because, and it's also the same reason why he's exhausted. He spends all this time hyper-focusing on everything that's possibly going on, because he said God broadsides me a lot of times. So a lot of times I'm focusing on this particular thing, and then the next thing I know, I just get broadsided, because they do not have access to the divine economy of grace. They don't know what graces God's going to give to people, and as a result, the demons get taken to the woodshed. And so he's fearful of getting basically beat up in relationship to that. The other part about it is that they have a conscience, and their conscience bothers them. And they also have a sense of shame for what they actually do. They even mention
the demons have a conscience.
Yes.
And they feel shame.
And they feel shame. They know what they've done is wrong. They'll admit as much in session. And that is actually, other than the fact that they don't get to see God, that's their greatest suffering, is this pang of conscience of the evil that they've actually done. Beelzebub's even admitted to me in session that every time he gets someone to fall, he gets a sadistic delight out of it, but it increases his shame in knowing that he's that much lower of an individual for having done that. And so part of their fear, one of their massive fears, is being revealed or found out about their interior lives in relation to human beings. Just as we would, if people found out our deepest, darkest secret, we would feel shame or embarrassed. They have that same thing, but it's even worse for them because of the fact that they know that a final judgment's going to come, where not just at our private judgment when we die, but God's going to assemble everybody at the final judgment. And every evil thing they've ever done will be known by everybody. So they have a tremendous amount of fear. Shame is defined as fear of being perceived as lowly.
That's interesting that they feel shame. So would it be possible for a demon to come to Christ and to
No.
It's not. Once it's in, it's over for eternity.
Yeah, because when they make their choice, well, I should say this, none of their sorrow or even their fear, but none of their sorrow is to a purpose of amendment. They have no intention of getting their act together. So basically when they made their choice, because they were created, when they were first created, the first instance, when they were created into a state of full comprehensive knowing. So they actually knew who they were, what their nature was, because they could actually see their nature. Whereas human beings, we have to infer what human nature is. They could actually see it. By that, they also knew what their assigned task was. God created them for a specific task, a mission, you could say, that they had to do. And that mission determines that means that one angel is actually essentially different from another one because they have a natural law. They have inclinations along that line. So, but then he also created them. He infused all the knowledges of the essences of created things that were going to ever exist. They didn't know the particulars that would unfold over history necessarily, but they did know all the essence. So they know what a tree is, what a human being is. This is why they're so adept at taking people out, because they understand human nature so well. Okay, so they were created in this state, but that means that unlike human beings, we got to wake up and drink some coffee and kind of get our act together before we can actually think anything of any depth, right? Well, not with them. They were instantaneously fully comprehended all of that. They knew what their task was. They knew what the reward would be if they were faithful to that, which would basically get to see him for all eternity and be an eternal happiness. Or they would also know what their eternal punishment would be if they did not do it. That means they had full absolute comprehension. Now, the reason God cuts us slack as human beings is because we're stupid, right? We are. We're just stupid. And so that's why God's like, okay, you're stupid. And so when we're contrite, it's because our wills aren't fixed. Because when we make a choice, we don't have that full kind of comprehension they did. Mm-hmm. We just later we realize, oh, that was just dumb, right? And so because of our lack of knowledge, we don't have that same level of knowledge where they had full comprehension. Now, St. Thomas says that their will is proportionate to their intellect, which basically means that when their intellect understands something, when they make a choice, it's proportionate to that thing, which meant that when they made their choice of being with God or not, of doing their task or not, they were all in. And that means their will became completely fixed in malice.
Wow.
In fact, it's funny because I actually had a case where this kind of thing came out, because I said, okay, so let me get this straight. So you were, I was dealing with this demon. So you were created to have the beatific vision, yeah. And you were created to have this phenomenal task of enlightening people's minds, yeah. And you were created to have all these perfections that would surround that, and you'd be able to influence people for the good, yeah. And you knew if you didn't do this, you'd end up in hell for all eternity, yeah, and it would bother you for all eternity, that you would just hate yourself because when they rejected their task, remember, their task is who they are. And that means, but they made their choice. It was perfect self-hatred, and you knew you'd hate yourself for all eternity, yeah. And I said, and you'd do it again? And he said, yeah, I would.
Wow.
And basically what it comes down to is there was a perfection that they saw that they wanted that wasn't part of their particular nature that they wanted. And they had to be willing to sacrifice that in order to have the beatific vision, which is a greater good. So they had to sacrifice the lesser good for the greater good. And they were unwilling to sacrifice that particular thing. So they literally chose a figment of their imagination because they knew they'd never have it. They chose that over reality.
Real quick, back to aliens and anomalous activity. So,
yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it several times, and I believe it too, that all of that stuff is from a spiritual realm.
Yes.
And so what I want to ask is, when we're talking about the elites, when we're talking about the people that are getting us to focus on the distraction,
right,
away from, in this particular example, away from the Epstein files and everything that went on there, onto aliens and UFOs. So the people that are in on this, do they know what aliens are, or do they have any knowledge that we don't have, or are their minds being controlled by a demonic force? And so
yeah.
they're carrying out a agenda and they don't even realize it.
I think there's levels.
Okay.
So some of them are that lower level, which you just mentioned, the last part. Other people actually do know that, there's nothing out there. This is just, and the diabolic. The other thing is some of the elite that are at the top are actually involved in occult activity. And those people know that we're actually dealing with spiritual issues here, or spiritual realities. One of the things that happens, I've never had it because they know I don't buy it. Because demons, they know a lot because they've been watching us for our whole lives, right? So they know what our general patterns are and what we're likely to think and believe. Although they do sometimes throw stuff up just to see if it'll stick. But generally they know it. And so they know I don't buy any of the alien stuff. And so they've never done this to me. But I do know other exorcists where they would, in session, they would actually, once the demon manifested, they would manifest in literally looking like an alien with the eyes and the small mouth and the whole bit turning gray. And they even call themselves gray. And they try and lie to the exorcist by saying, oh, well, we're not angels, good angels, and we're not bad angels. We're not demons. We're kind of in the middle. We're neither good nor bad. No, dude, you're just a demon, right? Because when you start talking to them, it's all that is a diversionary tactic, which they do in the sessions. So just as we're seeing this play out itself on a grander scale in the world with the whole alien thing, they'll try and do that in the session where they're just trying to distract you by something that they know that is not true, but they're hoping you'll believe it's true, because then from there they can manipulate you.
When you say there's different levels, do you have to pass through each level, or do you just arrive at a level? So like if you are in the occult, do you just arrive at that level where you're doing satanic rituals, or Do you graduate?
Some graduate. Some are actually they're trained in this stuff from the very beginning. Sometimes they're actually groomed. They'll watch them in college, or they'll watch them and then they'll introduce them into this through various secret societies and things of that sort. They'll get them into engaging in the occult. There's a few of these people, not many of them, that are actually part of a pedigree or history that extends back to the late 1500s, 1600s, where the occult practices has been in their family lineage literally for 300 to 400 years. And so they're so proficient in the knowledge about how this stuff works and what is actually involved. They know that there's demons and God, etc. And they know that their activity in the occult is getting demons actually involved. They fully know that. In fact, their knowledge of this stuff is almost on the same level as mine. And so they have a full understanding of it, but they're on the side of evil. And so they tend to raise their children generation after generation within that particular occult set of practices.
I mean, where do these people think they go when they die?
Well, they know they go to hell.
Why would you want to go to hell?
Well, because they have a false impression, because the demons will leave this with this, is that if they do a lot of evil in this life, which empowers the demons, then that will give them power when they get to hell. And so when they have that, and they actually believe the exercise of their power in hell will be something that they can then have a kind of a comfortable hell, or it's not going to be as bad because I have all this power. And part of it is that they just have an aversion towards things that are good anyway. And so they don't want to go that route. But they so I'm going to end up in hell, so I might as well get as far as I can. And that's one of the things we're seeing among some of the Satanists now, is that that's why they engage in things like child sacrifice and things of that sort, because they're thinking that once they get to hell, they're going to have all this power. But what they don't realize is that something which Satan himself actually once said to me, because I was noticing something in his behavior, because I wrote 3 books in psychology. So one of the things I just started doing is watching patterns of behavior of these guys, and both as individuals and as general, a lot of demons. And I said to him, I said, your exercise of power in hell is actually painful, isn't it? It's not pleasant. He says, no, I hate it. He says, I use it to keep, to try and protect myself, but I hate it. And so they don't seem to realize that even they might get a certain amount of delight in having all this power in this life, but even if they have it in the next, they'll be miserable. And they don't see it.
They're miserable in this life too.
They are miserable, but they think it's going to be like this life.
Man. Thank you. It's gonna be a heavy interview. So everybody starts off with an introduction here.
Okay.
Father Chad Ripperger, Roman Catholic priest ordained in 1997, theologian, philosopher, and one of the most prominent exorcists in the world. Hold degrees in theology and philosophy from University of San Francisco, masters from University of St. Thomas and Holy Apostles, and a doctorate from Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome. Yeah. Founded the Society of the Most Sorrowful Mother, also known as the Dolorian Fathers, a religious society based in Archdiocese of Denver, dedicated entirely to exorcism, deliverance, and healing. The Thomistic scholar and expert in demonology, angels, spiritual warfare, and the integration of theology with psychology. Author of books including Deliverance Prayers for Us by the Laity, Dominion, the Nature of Diabolic Warfare, and the Introduction to the Science of Mental Health. In your years as an exorcist, you've handled some of the worst cases of diabolic affliction, including full possession. These cases are often referred to you by bishops and other exorcists, literally the worst of the worst.
Generally, that's true.
Well, Father, I'd love to, and I'd be honored to start off in prayer.
Sure.
If you could lead us.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Direct, O Lord, all our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, so that every prayer and work of ours may begin from thee, and by thee be happening through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Father,
Thank you.
Yep.
Look, You can eat clean, train hard, do everything right, and you're still getting exposed to toxins every day. They're in the air, in the water, and inside your house. You can't avoid them. Over time, that toxic load adds up, and it shows up as brain fog, low energy, and just not feeling sharp. That's one of the reasons I use Row Nutrition's liposomal glutathione. Glutathione is what a lot of people call your body's master antioxidant. It helps support your liver's natural detox system and protects your cells from the junk we're exposed to every single day. But here's the issue. Most oral versions get destroyed in digestion, so you're basically wasting your money. Row's glutathione uses liposomal technology. It's built to actually get absorbed. If you're going to take glutathione, take one that works. No sitting in a clinic for hours. You take it at home or on the go and move on with your day. Go to rownutrition.com and use code SRS for 20% off site-wide. That's RHO nutrition.com, code SRS. I got you a couple of gifts here.
Oh, very good.
Actually, 3 of them. First one, Vigilance Elite Gummy Bears.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I like
Made in the
gummy bears.
USA. Everybody gets one.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is a rosary. And, my friend Dom Razzo makes these. They're called the Warrior Rosary.
Yeah, I know
Actually, I
Dom.
don't think he makes them.
Yeah, I know Dom. I just saw him about 6 weeks ago.
Did you really?
Yeah, gave some conferences with him there. Yeah,
I love
it was all
Dom.
on magnanimity. You know, how to make yourself great in virtue.
He loads me up with those.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He is.
Solid character.
He is. So I wanted to give you one.
No, thank you very much.
And then lastly, I heard you mention you carry.
I do carry. So
Thought you might want one of those. I got a friend over at SIG. His name's Jason. This is the SIG GTO. Go
very
ahead.
good.
Open it up.
Let's take a look. Yeah, I do actually. Oh, very nice. That is awesome. All metal.
All metal.
I love that.
It's got a compensator up front. It's got their new optic on top. I think it holds 21 rounds.
Wow.
The thing is like butter. You're going to love it.
Well, the good news is at our community, we actually have a range, target range.
Do you really?
Yeah, we do. It needs some development, but we actually have one there.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I'll be able to test this out. In fact, I'll be able to test it out tomorrow.
Right. Right on. Maybe we can break it in today before you leave if we have time.
All right.
But,
well, thank you very much. That's awesome.
You're welcome. And then one last thing before we get into the interview here. I have a Patreon account. Mm-hmm. It's a subscription account, and we've turned it into quite the community. And they're the reason, honestly, that I get to sit down with you here today.
Right, yeah.
And so they get the opportunity to ask every single guest a question. This is from Justin Larson. From your work in deliverance and exorcism, what are the main areas or institutions, family, education, media, politics, etc., where evil seems to be gaining the most ground in America today without people realizing its demonic influence at work?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, we're seeing just on the grand scale, like in politics and stuff like that, we're seeing the diabolic stuff pretty clearly. But the place that they're making the biggest headway is, I should say, if we're talking about a shift that we started noticing about 2 to 3 years ago, where the demons used to not attack and now they're doing a full-blown attack, is on good families. Families that historically led good lives, were doing, raising their kids properly, very often very religious, doing the things that they're supposed to do. Now they're attacking them, which gives us an indicator that they're emboldened. It's either a sign of one or two things. They're emboldened because as the world gets more evil, they get more power, and so they can actually attack fortresses that they used to not be able to attack, or that they would never attack in the past. And so we're seeing that specifically an attack on the family. So we're seeing a dissolution and a where all sorts of different kinds of problems are actually happening within family lives. Usually it goes in the form of one of the children who they've raised their kids properly. All of a sudden their kids just out of the blue just go off the rails and they can't seem to get too much done with it. Or it's an indicator that they know their time is short, which I think is also true.
The demons?
Yeah, they know their time is short. They know that God will only tolerate this level of evil that we're seeing in the world for only a certain amount of time. We saw it with the flood. We saw it with the wiping out of Sodom and Gomorrah. He'll only tolerate stuff for so long, and then he says that's enough. And then he basically does a corrective for human beings to correct them and get them where they need to be. And that means, though, the demons, they know that same pattern. They've seen it because they've watched it throughout history. And so they know that once it gets to this level, where, I always tell people, we tend to look down on the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, but I tell them, but at least they weren't trying to marry each other. Which makes us worse, frankly, as far as that goes. And the fact that, generally good people just tolerate that stuff and think it's actually okay because the majority of the public think it's okay for two men to get married, which I think is just an indicator of our insanity. But that all being said, I think they know that the gig is up. God's gonna intervene at some point, just to do the correction. And so, that they know the time is short, but then also the amount of power that they actually have. There was a prophecy that St. Francis of Assisi gave back in the 1200s, and he talked about a time which would come in which the demons would have unusual power. And as exorcists, we've noticed that their resilience and ability to take a beating and to hold on to things is on a level that we have, historically we just never saw. And so we know that there's a lot of evil out there that is empowering them to stay where they're at. So, but the primary angle of attack right now is on the family.
Man, the families.
Yeah.
What would the correction be? Is it going to be a correction, or are we approaching end times?
Well, ultimately, we don't really have any certitude. I mean, it could be the type of thing that it's the situation for the Antichrist is just about present. The Antichrist has to be able to rule the world. He's not going to rule through governance. He's going to rule it through economies. And so, even though he'll have control of the governments too, but the Antichrist would actually, when he appears, there has to be a unification of the worldwide economy in order for him, to a degree that's a little bit farther down the road than ours is at this point. So I don't think that he's just immediately around the corner, but I could be wrong in that. The other way that it can actually happen is there's been numerous prophecies by saints, apparitions where Our Lady's appeared, like at Fatima, where 3 children saw her, but then there was a miracle of the sun where 70,000 people saw this miracle that actually happened there. Where, so there's some of those apparitions, she actually talks about the fact that one of them is La Salette, where she said there's going to be a chastisement that's going to come. And that chastisement will be a minor chastisement, but it's going to be the type of thing where, excuse me, we're going to see infrastructure. God's going to basically allow some type of war or something that's going to happen to such a degree that, it's going to be brutal even for us who are good and who are prepped and ready for it and all of that. It's going to be brutal for everybody.
When you say, I can't remember how you said it, but you said it sounded like you were saying the stage is kind of set.
Yeah.
Almost everything that's happened needs to happen.
Yeah.
What has happened that needed to happen, and what still needs to happen?
Well, before the Antichrist comes, one of the things that we know from the fathers of the church is that there will be a worldwide implosion of people's morality. So, which we've seen, right? So that's happened since the 1950s. There's been an implosion where people just aren't following the laws of God or the natural law in any sense of the term. So we have that. The other part of it is, again, is the unification of the worldwide economies, because he has to be able to basically control people en masse. The other thing is it has to be something that the people that are alive, that in order to survive, you have to be able to plug into that economy in some fashion. That's why they talk about the mark of the beast. Well, we're almost there, where they could literally just decide, look, unless you're going to sign off on certain things, you're not going to have access to the digital currency that we're going to enact worldwide, and therefore, because that's how he could rule it. At least that's my opinion. I think that's one of the ways how he's going to control people is through digital currencies, and he's going to just shut people off, and that's how they'll be able to basically starve people out if they're unwilling to sign off on the Antichrist's rules. So it's going to be those kinds of things have, as I mentioned, have come into play.
So we're talking like social credit score.
Yeah, that's right, among other things. The other thing is, too, is we also know that the Catholic Church specifically will have to be at a state where it would have to have gone through a prior weakening crisis, and then it will resurge, and then right before the Antichrist comes, the morals of people will implode, they say, in such a rapid fashion to where this last 50 years will make our heads spin. It'll be that much more rapid. So there's some prophecies that have been fulfilled and some of them that haven't quite been.
When you say good people, I mean, is that everybody? Everybody will be under the influence?
Well, they say that the Antichrist will be so charismatic, and it will be that unless a person has specific graces from God, you're going to easily get sucked into into what he teaches and what he professes, which of course is going to be a rejection of Christ, and he will set himself up as the Messiah, but it'll be a political type of a thing. The other thing that has to happen too once he shows up, of course, the two prophets that are in heaven, Elijah and Enoch have to return. They're put to death. So because they actually return and preach against him. So those types of things have to happen before Christ actually returns and finally puts him to death.
Do we know what names they'll use?
We don't. You mean as Elijah and Enoch? It'll be clear who they are.
What about the temple?
According to the fathers of the church, at least the ones that I've read, they said the temple will never be rebuilt. And
It will never be
rebuilt. And the reason being is because, first of all, Julian the Apostate tried to rebuild it, and it was destroyed in the process. Christ actually put an end to the Jewish sacrifice on purpose, because the Jewish sacrifice in the Old Testament was a lead-up or a prefigurement of Christ. And so he gave them one generation in order for them to convert to Christianity. And when they didn't, he put an end to their sacrifice. So technically speaking, there hasn't been practicing Jews in 2,000 years because the temple hasn't been around. They haven't been able to offer sacrifice. Doesn't mean that they don't pray and things of that sort, but they haven't been able to enact their primary religious duties, which is to offer sacrifice. Plus their Levitic line, which is their priestly line, was destroyed. So, but then, and the difficulty is people tend to misinterpret the book of Daniel, which says when the abomination of desolation takes its seat in the temple. What they don't realize is that is not a reference to the Jewish temple. That's where the Protestants are getting it wrong. So a lot of the Protestants are thinking, oh, well, let's help the Jews rebuild the temple, and then that will usher in, because Christ is going to return, after the temple. They think the temple is going to be rebuilt. And then as a result of that, the temple has to be rebuilt in order for the Antichrist to put himself in there. So let's do that so that the Antichrist will come, and then that means that Christ will come, and that's kind of their reasoning behind it. Well, first of all, just getting through the years of the Antichrist is going to be brutal, so I wouldn't be pushing that. But the fathers of the church are very clear that it'll never be rebuilt, and that the reference to the abomination of desolation taking its seat in the temple is actually a reference to the Catholic Church. That's what the fathers say it's a reference to. That there's going to be some way in which the situation in the church will become compromised to such a degree. It doesn't mean that people have to know it, but its essential elements will still remain intact. But that the Catholic Church itself would become compromised in that process.
Jeez. When we're talking about the social critics, the ruling through the economy.
Yeah.
And, you had mentioned the mark of the beast. It's just in the past, 6 years, I've heard lots of different things that could be the mark of the beast. The first one being the COVID shot.
Yeah.
The next one I've always heard is digital currency. Another one could be Neuralink.
Yeah.
And so what I want to ask is, this is, what are people supposed to do? Let's say that they do usher in the new digital currency, and I'm sure it won't appear to be the mark of the beast. but maybe it becomes more obvious, as time goes on with people
Right.
holding out. I think about this all the time.
Right.
I have kids, they're small, I have a wife, I have people that depend on me. What are we supposed to do if we can't eat, take care of ourselves, provide for our families? What are we supposed to do?
Well, I think there's
I mean, if that's the only way you can survive, what are we supposed to do? Is the head of the family?
Yeah, the way the fathers of the church talk about though is they say that the mark of the beast, you can't receive the mark of the beast. So it's supposed to be something well, first of all, the mark of the beast is the inversion of what they call the mark of baptism. So when a person's baptized, God infuses a quality in the person's soul, which is a mark. And that's actually why, for example, in the baptism in the Catholic Church, there's a sign in which you actually take chrism and you sign it on the forehead as an indicator of that this person has been consecrated to Christ through his baptism. The mark of the beast is going to be the inversion of that. So it's going to be something in our bodies that is going to be that will give us access to these particular things. Okay.
Like Neuralink.
Like it would be something similar to that, or it could just be something like an RFID chip, which then you just be able to walk in and they can scan it. They know who you are and they know that you can have access to the food and things of that sort. It could be the type of thing that they get to the point where you just don't even have to carry credit cards, or even that your bank account will just be linked to this chip that's in you, and because that's how they could actually do it. The thing, though, is that the fathers of the church say that you're not going to be able to get that chip without some type of renunciation of Christ. There's going to have to be some religious thing you're going to have to accept that is contrary to the will of God and contrary to Christ. And so the moral of the story is that you have to be willing to sacrifice the lesser good in order to achieve the greater good. You have to be willing to, I have to follow Christ regardless of the personal cost. Now, God will also very often provide for people. If it's his holy will that people survive that time frame, he'll make it possible for them to do it. Though the other thing is I've learned, which in the military you've probably seen this too, the tighter you put your grip on a group of people, the more stuff slips through your fingers. And so I think that type of thing, there will be ways in which people will be able to survive. But I think they also have to be smart about it and actually learn just basic survival skills, learn how to fend for themselves just based on nature and things of that sort. But I think it's going to become extraordinarily difficult, especially with the way the technology is getting, to be able to even evade detection.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think about this all the time.
Yeah.
One more question. I've always heard about the golden calf.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play into the end?
Well, obviously the difficulty with the golden calf in the Old Testament is that they basically created a god of their own making, and so this is the same type of thing that you're going to see in relationship to the Antichrist. He will basically ensconce himself as the one to whom we are to worship. The difficulty with the Antichrist, of course, is he's going to be perfectly possessed by Satan. And he will be endowed with by perfect possession. Satan will be the one in the driver's seat, so that we'll be dealing with somebody who will be endowed with Satan's intelligence. And as a result of that, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult intellectually to combat this guy without specific graces from God.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move into the outline here.
All right.
So let's start with the 7 forms of diabolic activity.
Yeah. So I propose that as a kind of a topic in the sense that I think a lot of people are unaware of the fact that there's 7 different kinds of diabolic influence. The first is infestation, where they infest houses or locations, inanimate objects, animals, as we see in Scripture, where they
Animals.
Yeah, and we see that where Christ is about to kick them out of the demoniac, and they said, let us go into the pigs. And so they go in, they possess the pigs, and then they run the pigs. Of course, they can't help but destroy them. They run them into the sea there. So they can actually possess inanimate objects and things, and so that's pretty common. Not a whole lot, but a fair amount of my work is actually going and cleaning up places where evil things have occurred and the demons have gotten their foot in the door, and so we have to exorcise the place and clean it out. So there's a fair amount of that we actually have to do. And then the next one is ordinary diabolic influence. This is what everybody suffers. It's ordinary temptation. And the primary way that they tempt us is by putting stuff in our imaginations. So they'll put not just the image, but they can also put the perspective on the image. So an example I often use is, a wife wants to make her husband breakfast in bed because it's his birthday. And so she comes in, he's laying in bed, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. She comes in and says, "Dear, what time are you going to get up?" Because she's trying to time it in order to get this. And then what the demons do is once he hears that, what time are you going to get up, the demons can then they can skew the perspective on the thing. They can jade our perceptions of people and of things, and they do that. And then what he hears or thinks he hears, what he judges in that situation by their skewing his perceptions is, she just thinks you're lazy. Right. Rather than, and this is how they can actually destroy relationships. This is how and that in fact, in marriage, this is one of the ways that we're seeing as we're talking about families. That's always their first attack. They have to separate people psychologically first before they're ever going to get them to divorce. They have to separate them psychologically. And the way they do that is by skewing their perceptions. And then they can also move our emotions too. So they can kind of increase our emotional responses to things or cause emotions. And then as a result, it affects our judgment. So that's ordinary temptation.
Just go back to diabolic infestation. I mean, we talked about demonic influence on animals and humans. What about houses and buildings?
Yeah, houses. So I do a fair amount of exorcism of buildings. A lot of office buildings more recently, especially buildings where charitable activities are being done. People are just getting hammered. So like places that are working against abortion or like there's one that I've been working with from time to time. They're actually trying to do a Catholic version of hospice where they're just not offing people, that overdosing and killing them to get rid of them. They're actually letting them go through a normal process of death. They're getting attacked. So, but houses too, usually there's, evil that's occurred in the location or in the house itself, which has resulted in the demons getting into the house. And then that's when you start seeing, stuff moving around and things like that in the house.
So the opening for a demon to enter a human, a building, a house, an animal, maybe not an animal, is sin. Correct?
That's correct. So it's either the particular person's sin. So a lot of people, about 50% of the people that come to us that are possessed is because of the sin that they committed, or the other 50% is because sin has been committed against them. In locations, it's because somebody has done something particularly evil in a location, and as a result, the demons have gotten their foot in the door there. And so you have to go in. Sometimes finding out the history of the house can be very helpful, but you'll have to exorcise the place in order to get the demons out.
What are the most common sins they enter through?
Primarily occult activity, which we're starting to see a rise in. People engaging in witchcraft and Satanism, things of that in a particular location. Sometimes it can be something just as simple as one location that I had to address or deal with was it was a former lockdown for teenagers who had literally lost their minds. And so they would drug them up and put them in this place. And what got in there was, because of the things that were being done in that particular location, was a demon of flight. So you would walk in there and you'd get attacked like, "I got to get out of here," was what people would explain. I just got to get out of here. And but the local bishop cleaned that place up pretty quick and without too much fuss. There was another building where it was a demon of anger had gotten in there, but it was connected to heavy pornography use in that particular location. But it was a demon of anger that got in. And so that took a little bit. And actually that case was the first time I ran across what we call temporary possession, where the demon, the infestation in the location was so at such a level that he could actually attack people and actually quasi-manifest through individuals. And so you could literally stand, if everybody in the building was sitting in the same room, you could just look around the room and actually see there he is. And then, you know, 10 minutes later, you see it's attacking this person over here. And it was just anger. You could just see the anger, their complexion would change and everything. So you could see him going from location to location, or from person to person. And that's actually one of the ways that we detected him, and we were actually able to. I don't know if I never was actually put on that case. I just noticed the detection and knew about it. I did a quasi diagnostic of it, but the it was I don't know if it was ever gotten out of there. I don't know if they ever addressed it. So they get into buildings and stuff. I was actually in a hotel once where that didn't notice it when I first walked in, but then when I went to get to bed, the level of attack in that particular case was on the same level that it was in that building where the demon of anger and flights were. It was on that same level where the attack was so strong. And so I did do some prayers and some stuff to kind of keep my own particular room protected. I was able to sleep through the night. But because I don't know who the owners are, I could have done an exorcism over the whole place. But the problem with that is that the more stout the demon is, usually you have to go from room to room and exorcise every single nook and cranny of the place to make sure you get him out. So, which I've also had to do even in rectories where bad things have happened in the rectories, and so you have to go in and clean it out.
Are there any specific sins you see them go through more than others?
The demons?
Demons.
Well, the sins they like to gravitate towards the most, because they're the easiest to get human beings to fall into, are the sins against the sixth commandment, like fornication, masturbation, pornography, those types of things. Those are the ones that they tend to like to use because they're so easy to get us to fall into. And then from there, they'll graduate people to other sins and get them into stuff that's even more disorder.
What about lies? I mean, I see people that lie. I've lied. Mm-hmm. I think everybody's lied at some point.
Yeah.
But I always wind up coming clean, and I always feel better when
Right.
I mean, I do it right here on my show. I'll tell people all kinds of ridiculous, horrible shit that I've done, but it's to me it feels like a confession.
Yeah.
In some ways, it feels better than confession because nobody can hold that against me because I've already confessed. That's the way I feel, at least.
Yeah.
I've confessed publicly.
Yeah.
I did this. I'm fucked up, and now I feel better.
Right.
I see people who maybe I'm not necessarily friends with, but I know I'm associated with, who are living a lie. Mm-hmm. And some of these people have enormous audiences, just huge audiences. Lots of people know them, and they just continue to live the lie.
Right.
And you can feel the misery.
Yes.
You can see it. You can feel it. You know that their entire life is miserable.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, demons do actually drive that type of thing. There's a line in scripture, I said in my excess, all men lie. Okay. Well, not all men lie, but we're seeing it in our world and our culture now, which I'm sure you're experiencing this too, or just in the observation. You can't watch 5 minutes of the mainstream news media without knowing I'm being lied to here, right? I mean, in fact, I've told people that the mainstream news media lies so habitually, you can't even trust literally anything they say, good, bad, or ugly. And so, when they report on something, okay, maybe something's happening there, but it may not be the way they're reporting it, etc. But it's, in all the years I've been an exorcist, having a possession where it's authentically Satan is pretty rare. Now, there's demons that call themselves Satan, and they'll refer to themselves as that, but they're not actually Satan. I've only had one case where I actually thought, no, this guy is... This guy's Satan, because I beat this guy ruthlessly during a session for 3 days, and he didn't tell the truth once, even when it would go better for him. And we see this even in human beings. They'll lie even when the truth sounds better, right? So you just tell the truth. But this guy, no, he was so wed to actually lying. And of course, Christ said he was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. He was a liar from the beginning because of the fact that he basically lied to all the other angels that if you follow me, I will give you X, Y, and Z. He knew he could never give them X, Y, and Z. He couldn't give them anything. And so that was the lying part. And then, of course, the murder part was he wanted to murder our Lord and our Lady because he wanted to subvert God's plan of our redemption. So, but you're seeing as the world becomes more diabolic, you see people becoming more mendacious. They just lie on, they just on a, on a consistent basis. I think we see that type of thing too with, we see it like with stolen valor and things like that, where guys claiming they've had this, that, or that experience when they haven't.
How do you get rid of them though? If you're lying, if you're living a lie and a demon enters through that, or you're addicted to pornography or masturbation or whatever,
Right.
and that's how the demon enters.
Yeah.
If you stop that, if you come clean on the lie and you confess, if you stop masturbation, if you stop pornography, if you stop addiction,
Right.
does that clean yourself out?
So there's different levels. So how much influence a demon has is by degree. So that's why there's different kinds of possession. You can have possession where it's very deep and it's going to be a long grind. And then you have stuff that the demon does possess him, but it's pretty light and you can kick him out pretty quick. Well, it's the same thing in relationship to this. So you can, sometimes if people just stop the activity, then what you'll find is that then the demon just doesn't have anything to use or use against you. And this is something that we actually find very consistently, like in families. So for example, if we tell the guy, quit being effeminate and man up and actually be the head of your household, and tell the wife, submit in a rightly ordered and a loving fashion in relationship to what Christ intended for you. Do that. Just establish that right order. So stop the sinning of usurpation on her part, and you stop the sinning of capitulating your authority. You guys just stop that. Then what we find is that 80% of the time that just clears the demons out because they have nothing to use with. It's the same thing in our own personal lives. So in relationship to things like lying, that type, if you just stop, that's going to help. The other thing that can be very helpful is just making a renunciation. I renounce the demon of lying. I renounce the demon of X. And when people do that, and in fact, if a demon still has an influence in that area, they'll very often find that they'll either be blocked in being able to make the renunciation, or they'll find making the renunciation very difficult. But once they make the renunciation, it will break the back of his power in relationship to them. And so then they can combat him just by growing in the virtue of truthfulness. And then eventually get him out.
Do people come to this realization themselves, or are they guided to renunciation?
The renunciation, usually they have to be guided. Rarely do you find people, once in a great while, you'll see people say, I'm sick of this. I don't want this in my life anymore, or something to that effect. And so then then it'll kind of stop. There's a couple of other areas. Sometimes demons can get so far into a person's life because of their sinfulness that, they have to come to an exorcist to get it cleaned up. It just depends on the level. Sometimes, too, if people just develop a certain kind of discipline in that particular area, that will break the demon's back. In the Catholic sphere, what we have is when people go to confession, if they confess the particular sin that the demon has a hold on them, when the priest gives absolution, the legal binding force of the sin over the individual is absolved. That's why Christ said, whoever sins you retain, they shall be retained. And whoever sins you forgive, they shall be forgiven. So when they go to confession, what it does is that it breaks the legal bond that the demon has in relationship to the person by the absolution of the priest. And so we've actually had people liberated from possession just by going to confession and giving them absolution. We've also had cases where it protracts and we can't seem to get the demon out. And then eventually you'll get out of the demon, what is keeping you here? And they'll say, it's this one unconfessed sin over there. And so the person's like, I totally forgot about that. They go to confession, and once the priest gives absolution, boom, then they're freed. So it just depends on the level or the degree of the diabolic influence.
Okay. I used to carry one of those bulky leather wallets that felt like I was sitting on a brick all day. Cards falling out, receipts stuffed everywhere. It was a mess. Switching to Ridge completely changed that for me. The design is slim, modern, and it holds up to 12 cards, plus cash without stretching out or getting bulky. It's made from premium materials like aluminum, titanium, and carbon fiber, so it actually feels solid, not flimsy. And they've got over 50 colorways, so you can really pick something that fits your style. All Ridge wallets come with RFID blocking technology, which gives me peace of mind knowing I'm protected from digital pickpocketers. Plus, they have over 100,000 five-star reviews and a lifetime warranty. This is literally the last wallet you'll ever have to buy. Right now, Ridge is having their once-a-year anniversary sale. Get up to 40% off at ridge.com to see their huge sale. After you purchase, they'll ask where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Again, that's their once-a-year anniversary sale. Get up to 40% off at ridge.com. Don't miss it. Dolor.
So that is, it's a Latin word which means basically pain. And so basically this is where demons attack people physically. Now there's two kinds of people that get attacked physically. There's those who are possessed or have oppression, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. And that's because there's something in their life that needs to get cleaned up. But then the dolor only happens to people who are very saintly, very holy. So like Padre Pio would get physically beaten by Satan and drug around the room and things of that sort. You'd also see the Saint John Vianney. The same thing happened to him. Paul of the Cross. That's some of the authors in the past say that that's actually what Saint Paul was referring to when he prayed to God 3 times to take away this demon, and Christ said, "My grace is enough for you," which is important because people who suffer that, exorcism isn't going to help. All they have to do is pray and rely on God's grace to get through those particular moments, and God allows it for the humiliation of the demon, even though the demon just wants to take it out on the person because they hate people who are holy. But he'll allow it so that the demon gets humiliated by the person's faithfulness. And then he also uses it for the person themselves to advance in holiness and self-detachment and things of that sort. So it's rare. I've never seen an authentic case of it myself. I've only read about them.
Oppression.
So oppression is attacking people in relationship to their externals. It's an attack from the outside. So this includes things like destroying their finances, both their inflows. They can block people's, getting paid when they're supposed to be getting paid. They can block or they can cause damage to their property and things like that. So they're just hemorrhaging money all over the place, even though they shouldn't be. They can also attack their property to where, like one family that I've worked with in the past, it wasn't until we discovered that there was this demon in the actual property, and we found out who was getting him there, that he actually that it was the demon in the property that was causing them all their appliances. They would just go through appliances and get a brand new refrigerator. Within a month, boom, it's shot. Their stove would go out. The washing machines and stuff like that, they would just destroy. He was destroying everything. It can also affect their relationships. So this is why we'll see people all of a sudden, they might have a fantastic marriage, and then they might be cursed by somebody, and then all of a sudden, boom, the oppression sets in, and then all of a sudden things are just miserable between the two, and a lot of times they can't necessarily pin it on what either one of them actually did, but they'll destroy people's relationships.
What do you mean cursed by somebody?
So somebody can actually do a ritual, which is like basically an offering to Satan, or do something to empower the demons to come and afflict a particular individual.
A human being can do that?
Yes, they can.
Is that common?
It's common enough to where I see it about 3 or 4 times a year where people have been cursed. It's becoming more common now because more people are getting involved in Satanism and witchcraft. So as that tends to get worse, oppression, and that's one of the, because we keep statistics, the amount of oppression is drastically on the rise because of the increase in the involvement in the occult.
And how do you defend against that? Would you know? Is there any way to know if somebody on Earth is cursing you?
Well, the way that you're going to usually know it is that it's probably a curse, is that nobody in the family has done anything sinful to bring the oppression on, because oppression can also be caused by sinful behavior. One of the primary ways that we see an increase in oppression is guys watching pornography that's been cursed, and then they bring that into their family, and then and then they suffer the oppression for having watched this stuff that's been cursed. But the way that you
hold on. Sorry. Yeah. You mean they actually curse the content that they're watching?
Yeah. So what happens is it was the Satanists in the 30s, 40s, and 50s that taught the people in Hollywood that if you curse the master copy, all of the subsequent copies made from that will bear the curse and it can influence people. That was then also taught to the people in the music industry. And the reason they were doing it is to boost the addictive effect of the music. This is why, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, you'll walk into some like Walmart or something, not that I would recommend it, but you go into Walmart and there's playing some tune and you come out and you can't get that tune out of your head. So then what I would do is when I would notice that, I would just say a short binding prayer against any demon causing that in, and boom, it would stop. So they also taught this, though, that gets the Hollywood people then talking to the people, because one of the epicenters of pornography production is in California. So they taught them to curse this as well. They taught the Satanists taught them to curse this, and it'll make the pornography more addictive. And so that's why you see that's one of the reasons why it's more, there's an uptick in it. The curse, depending on the particular individual, can have varying degrees of the influence as a result of that. So we see a lot of people that have oppression as a result of watching this cursed pornography. We're also seeing obsession, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But once in a while, you'll see people actually become possessed. So I knew one case, it wasn't my particular case, because I do a lot of consultation with exorcists, where this guy had watched a piece of pornography and became possessed as a result of it. When this exorcist got him into the session and got the demon to tell him what was the cause of the possession, he said pornography. So then he asked the guy, did you watch pornography? He said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, what happened? He said, I don't know. I said, all I know is that once I watched that piece of pornography, I became completely obsessed with the woman that was in the pornography. And so I spent all my time trying to find her in all the other forms of pornography that I could find where she had acted in it. And so, and he'd become possessed as a result of it. So the curse can actually have its effect. Now, the way curses normally work is there has to be a vulnerability on our part for the curse to actually take place. And that can be anything from, you're committing some seriously sinful act, and that's your opening door and the demon gets in from the curse. Or it can also be some minor defect that we particularly have, like, or some failing that we did. I actually, speaking of curses, I actually had one of the exorcists that trained me asked me to take a look at this one case, and he said, she's possessed. And I said, okay, well, I'll go talk to her, because he said he couldn't get to her. So I went, and when I saw her, I said, yeah, she's possessed. It's pretty clear. She's getting occult knowledge but she likes it. So I told her, look, I can't help you. Unless you're willing to cut bait with these demons, I can't help you. So she says, no, I still want him. So I said, okay, well, if you change your mind, I'll be willing to help. Well, I left. The next day I came down with the worst case of gout I've ever come down with in my entire life. I could not. A week later, usually if I got gout when I was younger, I would just cut out dairy, and then boom, it would go away. Well, there was no change in this thing. I even took those pills that take out the uric acid, no change. Then it just dawned on me, I wonder if this woman, a week later, if this woman didn't curse me. So I did a minor exorcism over myself, and boom, it was gone. So I called the exorcist that had trained me, and he didn't answer. 2 weeks later, he calls me, he says, oh, I would have gotten back to you, but I have had the worst case of gout I've ever had in my entire life. I said, let me guess, right foot, big toe. He says, yeah, how did you know? I said, dude, you were cursed. And so what was the vulnerability? The vulnerability is anytime I do this work, I always make sure that there's a prayer of protection I say before I do that. And I had failed to do that when I went in to talk to this lady. And that left me unprotected when I walked in. I just walked in thinking, well, I can talk to her and size this up without having to depend on Christ for my protection. Not that was consciously going on, but that was the upshot of it. A year later, another priest called me and says, I think she's had a change of mind. Would you talk to her? I said, yeah, I'll talk to her. But this time when I went in, I said a prayer of protection. I asked St. Michael to protect me. And then I said a prayer which was taught to me by an exorcist, which was, Jesus, if this person tries to curse me, I ask you that if it's your holy will, it be sent back from whence it came. But in either case, keep me protected. So I said that prayer. Walk in, talk to her. She still wants the occult knowledge that she was getting. I gave her the same story. Can't help you. If you change your mind, let me know. I left. A week later, nothing had happened. And then I called up the priest and said, well, what happened? And he said, well, just after you left, she ended up in the hospital, which tells you two things. This is one of the reasons why people who are very high up in the occult arts, generally speaking, do not like getting involved in cursing other people because they know they can become subject to the curse that they do. The second part of it is that that Christ hears our prayers. He honored that prayer.
Would you say the occult, is there a difference between the occult and Satanism?
Well, cult is more of a genus. The species would be like specific kinds of witchcraft or specific kinds of Satanism.
Okay. And when we're talking about, when you had brought up the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And then that cursing the content. And then they taught the music industry and they taught the porn industry.
Right.
I mean, that just makes me think of Disney.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we know.
Just about every kid in the country watches Disney.
Yeah.
Watched Disney. I grew up watching Disney.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I know it's real. I mean, I remember, I don't know, probably in my 20s, everybody started talking about the cover of The Little Mermaid and how there was a penis as one of the towers.
Right,
and there was something in Aladdin that spelled sex, and one of the guys got an erection, and there's all these little parts in these movies that have some type of perversion to them.
Yes.
Is that a curse? What is that?
Well, actually, the technical term that we tend to use for that is called the revealing of the method. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I haven't.
Basically, it basically means that it can be connected to a curse. They could curse this so that it has a more so that its distribution becomes more extensive and more people watch the thing. But a lot of times, what that is that the thing about Satanists, and also even though it's occult and the fact that it's hidden, there's a side to diabolic psychology that even when they remain hidden, they still want to show themselves in some way. They're still going to reveal themselves in something. They can't help it. And it's the same thing you see. It's the same thing you see with Satanists. It's the same thing you see with Freemasons when they're involved in certain things. It's the same stuff you see across the board in these particular groups. And so they just tend to reveal stuff. But their hope is to, even in the revealing, that you don't know. There's a sadistic delight they get out of basically putting it to you without you even knowing it.
How much of the country or the world, I mean, is this affecting? So many people watch.
Oh yeah, I think it's
listen.
Yeah, I think it's affecting just large percentage of the population. Somebody once asked me, what percentage of the adult population is diabolically obsessed, and I had to think about it a little bit. And then the number that came to me was about 25% of the adult population in this country, at least, is diabolically obsessed. So I asked several other exorcists without giving them my number, and they all came up with the same number. About 25% of the adult population is diabolically obsessed in our culture. So it's having a huge impact. Part of the other difficulty is that most people don't realize is that if something's been cursed, or if there is something evil in a particular movie or in a video or something of that sort, or even in an audio, each time it's played, it's offensive to God. And as a result, the demons gain empowerment through it. So if you have a sex scene in a movie, if it's replicated on 1 million screens, God's offended every single time that thing appears on any screen. And so that really does gain the demon's power. And this is one of the reasons why the demons will do everything they can to maintain immorality in certain areas, usually in the areas of the Sixth Commandment, or as we were talking about, pedophilia, which is really empowering to the demons, especially when the pedophilia involves killing a child in ritualistic sacrifice. The demons they really gain a certain amount of power of that. And then we also gain power just out of our sinfulness and things of that sort. But this is how they become empowered through those particular things.
You had mentioned the woman that you were talking about earlier. She had occult knowledge.
Yeah.
That the way you made it sound, it just appeared in her mind.
Yeah, that's right.
Like a download or something.
Right.
What is that? What is occult knowledge?
It's basically demons can feed people two kinds of information. So occult knowledge is of two kinds. The first is they can just put an image in your imagination about what's happening in another location. Or if a demon is putting a thought in someone's head, they can actually put the thought in someone else's head and tell this person, this is what this guy's thinking. So you see that somewhat commonly. So they can give us particular knowledge about things that are actually happening. Then this can be even through a person's history. So they can, you walk in and all of a sudden, if the person is possessed, they can start, the demons will just, if they're manifested, they'll start telling you about things that have happened in your history and you've never even met this person. So it deals with particular knowledge. The other kind is,
Could that be the other side as well?
in what sense?
Could the good side, could God send somebody to read your mind?
Yes, they can. It's called divine revelation. That can happen, but it's extraordinarily rare. And just as the demons can put stuff in our minds, our guardian angels and angels can put stuff in our minds as well for the good, to kind of clue us in and things of that sort. The other form is kind of a generalized knowledge of just like a science. So demons can actually teach people things about how like physical things work. I'm personally convinced that even though I'm kind of a fan of a lot of his work, is Tesla. When Tesla was coming up with all these ideas, I'm like, how would this guy come up? And he actually describes how his inventions would come into his mind all completely, the design all complete at once, instantaneously. It wasn't that he thought, okay, if I do this and I put this together and put this, it wasn't that. It was just whoop, the whole thing comes together in his mind. That's how demons actually communicate the knowledge to him. And there is some report. I'm still trying to track down the veracity of it, but there's a report that he was actually involved in spiritualism. Which is a form of the occult. So, but anyway, so they can give us those kinds of knowledge. And you see this like in cases in session, people who have not had any serious theological training, when the demons are talking, they're making theological distinctions that, someone who has my level of study knows, but the person who's possessed has no clue what it means. In fact, sometimes they'll come out of the session and they're like, what does that mean? They don't even know what it means, but it's actually very, it's at a level that and it's very clear and it's very precise, and their distinctions, their wording is done in such a way that you realize, okay, this is somebody who knows something occultly. This is not a human being.
Obsession.
So obsession is when they attack our interior faculties, specifically the imagination and emotions again. But unlike ordinary temptation, this is extraordinary, where it's very powerful and very strong. And the pattern that you'll tend to see with that is the person it'll just switch on and it just switches off. If it's a psychological condition, it will tend to be, it'll switch on because something external happens and the person just reacts to it. Or it'll be because psychological illnesses involved intellectual and other kinds of habits, it's consistent and it tends to act that way. So the person's always thinking about this. Whereas when it's diabolic obsession, all of a sudden, boom, they're thinking about something. They can't get their mind off of it. And then, they might pray or they might do something else, and then boom, it shuts off. And so that's kind of the pattern that you tend to see. It'll switch on and it switches off. But it's the demon sees the person's imagination and they can't think outside the box. It's like they get tunnel vision and everything they see is seen in that light. Then they can also move people's emotions independently of what's in our imagination, because the way we're designed psychologically is our emotions are moved by the perspective of the image that we have in our imagination. So, for example, in a guy's first marriage, his perspective on his wife is she's lovable, she's nice, she's kind to me. It's a good perspective, right? She's just, look, she brought me my beer, she's such a great wife, etc. 10 years later, after they've had a lot of knockdown, drag-out fights, the perspective, she hasn't changed, but the perspective has changed. And so he has a different emotional reaction when she walks into the room. So and that's how we can actually change our emotional states just by what the perspective we take on it. Well, the demons can put that perspective on it, but what they can, and they can do that in diabolic obsession, which they often do, and we call it running commentary, where it doesn't matter what the person tries to reason in relationship to, and I don't know, this person's not like that way. Yeah, but then there's the demon just keeps dragging it back to that perspective. But the other thing is they can move the emotions without anything in the imagination. So a person just all of a sudden, boom, they're just angry. And you're like, why are you angry? I don't know. I don't know why I'm mad, right? And then it shuts off just as quickly. So sometimes like you'll pray over people who are diabolically obsessed. When you pray over them, all of a sudden they feel this lifting of that perspective and that emotional state. They just feel it lift. And then they seem liberated. And then eventually it'll kind of set back in. In most cases, once in a while, it'll stop altogether. But how entrenched the obsession is or how strong it is going to determine how long of a period of lucidity they're going to have. So if you pray over them and then, for a half a day, they're like, man, I feel great. I'm not thinking about this anymore, and they can engage in normal things. And then it starts to slowly slip back in. Well, then that tells you it's pretty strong. Whereas if it goes a week or two and then it sits back in, then that means it's pretty light. And you just have to do certain things to get it blown out.
Does that mean it leaves and comes back, or is it still in there?
So the way obsession works is that there's what they call a period of crisis and a period of lucidity. So once a person is diabolically obsessed, unless they do specific spiritual things to get rid of it, it's going to persist where they're going to go through periods of crisis where they're obsessing about these particular things. They can't get their mind off. It can be anger or fear, or it can be anything, self-loathing. It can be all sorts of things. Or even, that's why self-hatred, I tell people, look, that's what demons do. You got to stop it, But then there's also, then they go through a period of lucidity where they might have a day or two where they feel fine again and they seem okay, and then it sets back in. And so that's the general pattern you're going to see. The longer it goes on, they're going to spiral downwards, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And eventually it gets to the point where they don't have hardly any periods of lucidity. And it's usually at that point that the demons will drive them to do something in that obsession. And the person's become weaker through that process of giving into it and ruminating about it, because each time they give into the thought, they're empowering the demon to stay there. So over the course of time, it gets to the point where it gets to the point where the person, excuse me, spirals downward, and then demons will convince them to do something that's gravely sinful, and that opens the door to possession, and that's their goal.
Possession.
Okay, so possession is where demons actually take possession of a part of the body or the whole. And so there's two kinds of possession. There's perfect possession, where the person has given themselves over to the demon entirely, and then the demon possesses the whole body, and the demon is manifested all the time. Now, we don't necessarily notice that, and we can't necessarily tell. The way you're going to know it is by what we call secondary signs of possession, like malice, mendacity, animus delendi. It doesn't matter. Every time this person got that, there was a politician who, every time I saw this guy, I said, this guy's got to be possessed, because every single thing he did maximized damage within his capacity to do so, right? And so you'll see those kinds of things, even though they don't preternaturally manifest, like they're not going to morph into something, or show occult knowledge or any type of thing. Everywhere and in each situation they're in, they just cause damage or cause difficulties. Mendacity, just a variety. So there's a number of different secondary signs. But that's perfect possession, which is rare. And the exorcists never see those, because those people are not interested in getting liberated, because they actually like the possession, because the demon's giving them something as a result of a little perk for it.
So they realize they're possessed. They
Yes,
understand that they're...
Yes. They know, because at a certain point he reveals himself to him and says, if you give me possession, or give me your soul, or whatever the case is, then I will give you X in return for it. And then the person, by that time though, perfect possessions don't happen until the person has gotten to the point where they've given into the normal possession for some time. So that's perfect possession. Then there's partial possession. And that's where the demons only possess a part of the body, and they'll only manifest during part of the time. And so the demon's not necessarily in the driver's seat all the time. And so they go through periods of crisis and lucidity as well. And so those are the different kinds of possession. And possession is, you can have a number of different possessors in a case. Sometimes you get just one demon possessing. Sometimes you'll get legion I've had a case where it was actually legion. I'm like, yeah, I can see it, because this woman was a walking vacuum cleaner. It didn't matter who she was around. She picked up that person's diabolic baggage. But then it can also be, as I mentioned, they're all different kinds of possessors. It can be Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Baal, the generals, which we talked about or mentioned. It can be just a number of different ones of them. And then also possession is by degree. And so you can have somebody who might be possessed by a fair number of demons, but you can get them out pretty quickly. Others might just be one or two possessors, but you have to grind on it for a long period of time.
When we're talking about the occult and satanic rituals and worshiping, and are these people, are they possessed? Are they hoping to be possessed? They want to be possessed? Are they inviting demons into their soul, into their mind, into their body?
Yeah, okay, so there's varying degrees. Some of them are not, actually. They're actually not possessed. They're just involved in it because the demons do reward them, like by obsession or by giving them pleasure in doing sadistic things. And so they're not necessarily possessed. Some of them are possessed, and that's why they're actually involved in it, and they know they're possessed. Some of them, as I mentioned too, there's like the family histories where it's in the family line. So the possession, actually, the father will actually have children and then do a ritual to get the demon that's possessing him into the child, so that it passes from generation to generation. So they'll have generational possession that's been going on for, literally hundreds of years in some cases. And so those people, they know they're possessed, and they like it.
So is that like generational trauma?
Well, it's distinct from generational trauma in the sense that generational trauma is something that gets passed from generation to generation, but it's more of a psychological thing, even though demons can be involved in it. But you can have generational trauma without it being possession. But the possession can be the result of the trauma.
So when you're saying a father does a ritual on his offspring to carry on the possession,
right?
What would that look like?
Well, very often it's just some type of either like a black mass or some type of other satanic ritual that they actually have, because they have a variety of different ones that they do. Sometimes it just involves satanic ritual abuse of their own child. They'll abuse the child sexually or some other fashion. So you'll see that they'll do specific things to rituals that are somewhat designed for them. But it's usually some type of black mass or satanic ritual abuse that occurs.
Did you say black mask?
Black mass.
Black mass. Black mass. And so if it's sexual in nature or something horrific like that, I would imagine that creates a hatred between the father and the son, or the father and the daughter.
Yes, it does, Junior. Yeah.
And so how would that get carried on? Do they teach them later in life, this is what you have to do to your kids? How does it get paid forward?
Oh yeah, they do. Just as you would teach your kids about Christ and give them catechesis about this is how this is what we believe about Christ, this is how you behave. They do the same thing, except in relationship to their occult practices and Satan. So they do the same thing.
Why would that person want to carry it forward, though?
Because of the fact that usually during that process, they'll teach them rituals which empower them in relationship to other people or other things, or especially with the boys, not so much with the girls. Very often what will happen is that they'll teach the boys how to engage in satanic ritual abuse, which is sexual in nature, and the boys physically enjoy it, and so they'll have that motivation. So there can be natural motivations. Two, once the possession occurs, the demons will drive the person to want to know more about it.
Okay. And then the last one, subjugation.
So subjugation is when people make a pact with the devil, which, if I remember right, when Dan said, demons can't make a pact, technically speaking. A pact is a contract. In order to validly enter into a contract, you have to be able to have assurance that the other person, that both parties can fulfill the terms of the contract. Well, demons can't guarantee that they can actually give you the terms of the contract. because of the fact that even though we can do something sinful and that opens the door, only God, Christ, is the one who determines whether they can step across the threshold. And the way we know this is actually, again, going back to that where the demoniac has legion and they ask to go into the pigs. The demons know Christ, because Christ himself said, all authority has been given to me on heaven and earth, right? They know that they can't do anything without his permission. And that's why the demons approach him and say, let us go into the pigs. Because if they could do whatever they wanted, they would have just went into the pigs. They wouldn't even have asked him. But they didn't. They knew that he determines anything that they can do. Their spiritual warfare, the battle, the complexion of spiritual warfare is entirely determined by Christ. How much, who can possess somebody, the degree of the possession, what kinds of manifestations they can do, all those things, Christ completely determines. Even in relationship to ourselves, the types of temptations that we undergo and that type of thing, Christ is the one who determines what the temptation can be, the degree of the temptation, how long it's going to go on, etc. So they can't step across the threshold unless he gives them permission. It's the same. So in a pact with the devil, they know that they don't know if Christ is going to give them permission. Now, sometimes he does give them permission to fulfill the terms of the contract. Sometimes he doesn't. And so one case I had, the possessor was the noonday devil, which is mentioned in Psalm 91. So that you have this guy was possessing this particular person. And so at a certain point, I asked the guy, well, how did you, what was how do you think you became possessed? He said, oh, I made a pact with the devil. I said, well, what was promised you? And he said, money and fame. And I said, well, did you get it? No. I said, well, that's because they can't necessarily give it to you. Whereas other people have made pacts with the devil and have become famous and have become rich, etc. And so that subjugation, though, is when that person enters into a pact with the devil. And in order to end the subjugation, not the effects of the subjugation, but the subjugation itself, they just have to renounce the pact. But the effects can continue because you can have people who renounce the pact, but then the effects of the pact continue. So the possession continues, or the diabolic influence in their family continue. This is the one. This is the thing that we tend to see quite a bit in relationship to the Freemasonic curse. They'll move up the ranks of Freemasonry, but the effects, even after they leave Freemasonry and renounce it, the effects, unless they do it in a very structured way, which will break the effects, the children and very often the wife and stuff will start to still suffer those effects.
This is the stuff that I really want to talk to you about, the voluntarily making a pact with the devil, these contracts. I mean, how does it happen? Where's the approach? Is it in your mind? Is it from somebody in the occult? How does this happen?
The way it normally happens with most people is that they'll hear about it, that certain people gain fame and power and as a result, or wealth as a result of being involved in the occult. And so if they make a pact with the devil, the demons can actually provide these particular things. And so they'll actually just, they might do a little bit of research on the internet or something like that, but they'll actually just, pronounce that I make a pact with the devil for X. In relationship to, so that, X and I get Y. Okay. Now, that's kind of one of the lower level kinds of things. Sometimes the demons will suggest it to the person, why don't you make a pact with the devil? So that, because they can tempt people in relationship to that. That's going from partial possession to full possession. There's always a pact that's made. So the demons are always going to be the ones that suggest that. There are historical cases where the demons will actually even appear if the person's particularly bad, or if they really want this person and they've been working on him for a while to gain some type of psychological compatibility with the demons with the person. The demons themselves will actually appear to the person and suggest the pact. One case I actually dealt with, a woman basically made a pact with the devil, and he showed up to fulfill his side of the pact. There are also instances, very rare historically, where the demons will actually appear with a handwritten note in the person's own blood. And then, because they can sometimes extract a person's blood from them in a variety of different accidents and things like that, or they'll just tell the person, here, sign this with your own blood, and the person actually does it, and then the contract disappears. There's actually a ritual which is designed to force the demon to return the contract so that it can be destroyed. because as long as the contract is in existence, the effects will continue.
So these are conversations that could be inside of your head. These are conversations that could literally be right in front of you.
That's right.
And you're fully aware of what's happening. This isn't deception. This is
No.
you do X for Y.
Why? Yeah. The reason they know is because they know the pact isn't binding legally in some fashion, even though technically speaking it's against the natural law, so it doesn't have any binding force. But they know it doesn't bind a person unless the person voluntarily knows what's going on and actually says yes. If they're ignorant about it in any degree whatsoever, the pact isn't fully binding. And so that's why they'll spend a lot of time massaging the person psychologically in their sin and in a variety of other ways to get them to the point where they're be open to, that's that psychological compatibility, open to the pact. They'll work on the person first before they do that.
How many people do you think are doing this? I mean, we saw the P. Diddy stuff, the Epstein stuff is going crazy. It has been going crazy for years. I mean, you see politicians just consistently lying, like knowingly lying. Not, I couldn't accomplish that. And it's a straight up fucking lie.
Yeah, I'm astounded, frankly, that they can just look straight in your eye and just tell you something that's completely false, and they're bad at nothing. And for all intents and purposes, you look like they look like they're convinced of it. As far as I think in some of the upper levels, I think there's a fair number of people that are doing that. Percentage wise, I would have no idea, but it's drastically on the rise. That's the thing that we've noticed, because when I first started doing this work 18 years ago, the number of people that had been involved in that was there was not a whole lot of people that were involved in that. But as time goes on, we're seeing more and more of that, where we're having to clean people up because of those kinds of things that are happening. And the occult activity among the youth, especially those under the age of 25, is drastically on the rise. And so I think we're seeing much more of that type of thing happen.
What do you think about the stuff with for example, the latest Olympics opening ceremony, this big pentagram in the middle of it, or the one prior to that, also the Winter Olympics, the mockery of the Last Supper? I mean,
right.
What is this? What is this?
Well, did you ever see the ceremony for the opening of the tunnel in Switzerland? It was a full-blown ritual to Baphomet. So I think that's just part of the revealing.
What tunnel in Switzerland?
There's a tunnel that they had cut. I think it was like a 23-mile long tunnel that they cut. And when they did the opening ceremonies for it, it was supposed to cut down on this travel significantly for people in between countries. And you can actually find it online, but when you watch it, it's a full-blown ritual to Baphomet. And so I think that's all part of the revealing of the method, that the people that are at the top of these, the political elite, the financial elite, even people that are in charge of, stuff like the ceremonies that are the actual Olympics and that type of thing, these people that are at the very top of it. I don't know about specific individuals, but the people at the top, they're doing this stuff because they're revealing their belief. They're revealing the method.
They just want everybody to see. They want us all to know that it's real. I mean, what is the point?
The point is that demons are showmen, and so they get a certain amount of glory by their stuff being manifest in this life. And so that's why they like those two things being shown. But then also a lot of it is just to normalize people's exposure to it, so people have seen it enough to where they become comfortable with it, and then from there, then they can start opening up the avenue a lot more towards getting people to actually believe it. Once it becomes normalized and they've seen it enough, they're like, oh, okay, maybe I do believe that. Whereas if the first time you see something like that ritual to Baphomet, you're just like, that's just sick. That's just weird. Whereas if they just keep doing it, eventually it becomes normalized, and then people get used to it.
Do you think pedophilia will become normalized? Massive display of that happening right now.
Yeah, there is. I think what's happening, I don't think it's going to be normalized in the sense that your average guy on the street is going to be doing it, because it's against the natural law, right? We have natural inclinations, that God inclines us towards certain things, and if a guy has just natural virtue, he's going to find that stuff revulsive, right? So I think a vast percentage or majority of the people in their culture aren't going to ever do that type of thing. But I can see it getting to the point where, especially if they start the psychological approach, which is, which is what they're trying to do now, they're trying to remove pedophilia from the DSM so that they just, because once it's removed from the DSM, then you can decriminalize it and then you can go from there, which is actually what they did with homosexuality. And so they want to do that. And so eventually I could see it getting to the point where people just think, yeah, that's normal. That's what Joe does, or whatever the case is, rather than, I like this, but he likes that. I can see it becoming normalized in that fashion if they keep maintaining it. Because right now the Epstein thing is to expose people to it in such a degree, and at the high level people being involved in it is done in such a manner that it gets people to realize that they want to give people the impression that it's more ubiquitous, that it's everywhere, everybody's doing it, or that people who reach this, it's normal for the people who get to the top to do this kind of thing.
Do you think that's why that was actually my next question? Why do you think this is all being revealed right now?
I think part of it's the revealing of the method. I think part of it is
it showmanship?
Showmanship. I think a lot of it's that.
Is there any good coming from it being revealed?
Yeah, I think what's the good that's coming from it is that a majority of the population, at least in this country, is starting to realize that, we have some sick people that are running things. So I think that's a good thing that people actually know, because this stuff has been around for a while. These people have been doing this for a while. Part of it is, too, is I think God is forcing it to the surface so that we see how evil of a people we've become.
What do you think comes next?
I think we're going to get a divine spanking. I think we're going to have some type of war, some type of thing that he's just going to, because it says right in the scripture, it says that the wages of sin is death. I just don't see how we're not going to get out of this situation without mass death.
Well, let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll get into some exorcisms. All right, Father, I want to move into kind of what happens, what's the process like, what goes on inside the room when an exorcism's happening.
Depending on what the stage of the case is. So if we were just starting out, that's one thing. But if you're talking about just your average, where we already know the person's possessed, the demon's manifested in the past, basically what will happen is it's a very structured approach. So in many cases, if the person who's possessed can tolerate it, we'll actually offer Mass so that the person can receive Holy Communion, which then weakens the demons significantly during the session. So then we'll say Mass. We also encourage the person beforehand to have gone to confession before they get to the session. So then at the session, we'll say Mass. And when the session begins, there's a series of prayers that we actually start before we start the formal ritual. And basically, the reason those are done is to provide everybody protection that's in the room. And it's also done to make sure that we clamp down on the demon from doing things that are just distractions or bad behavior. Because usually by the time you get a month or two in, you kind of know what their patterns are going to be and what they're likely to do. And this is also to keep people physically protected so the demons don't do anything physically to harm anybody. So we do a series of prayers, binding prayers, which bind the demon from being able to do certain things. And then we'll actually start the formal ritual. So the ritual it's a Latin ritual. It usually starts out with the Litany of the Saints. And that is also diagnostic, because a lot of times when the demons, during different phases of the possession, they'll react to different saints at different times, and usually you'll start finding out why you're reacting to this saint, and it's usually because it has something to do with the demon's particular sin, or the saint is going to be instrumental in interceding for this person that's possessed, etc., or the saint actually might be the nemesis of the particular demon that you're actually dealing with. So, for example, Saint Joan of Arc is the nemesis of Satan under the aspect of treason through ambition. And so which was in a case where that was what was the reason for the possession cases, that we'd actually come to knowledge about certain things going on in the world and in the church, about how people were advancing themselves in political sphere and even in the church through by committing treason, and the ambition part was because they wanted positions of power and things of that sort. And the reason Joan of Arc was the nemesis in that particular case was because of the fact that she had been put to death by a bishop who was committing treason because he was siding with the English when he was French so that he would get a bigger diocese. And so he was committing treason through ambition. And so she became the nemesis of Satan, who was driving that whole process. She became the nemesis of Satan under that particular aspect. So it's diagnostic, so you can actually find out and you afflict the demons by that process too. Just for them to hear the names of people who are faithful afflicts them. Then you actually go, it kind of alternates between what we call deprecatory and imprecatory prayers. So you say a prayer and asking Christ for specific things, and then you go into imprecatory prayers, which is a commanding of the demons. And then that's where the bulk of the ritual is done, where you're commanding the demons to consider specific things. Because the way the demons are weakened is they hear everything you say. Because I mentioned, their knowledge, they got this infused knowledge in the beginning. But all the particular things that happen as they occur is infused in the demon's intellect as it happens. And so as you're saying these things, he sees it in his intellect. And so what happens is in that process, you're basically forcing him to consider truths which are painful to his will, because they only have intellect and will. And so it causes pain in their will. And over the course of time, their will, just like ours, when we become fatigued, it gets to the point where it can't sustain the pain anymore, and then it gives in. And so you keep forcing him to consider certain truths and do certain things. So we're also, the prayer of the church is being applied to him to try and cast him out. We're commanding him to leave, because the demons know the authority structure perfectly. And so they know when the priest has received the faculties from the bishop that he has the authority to command him to leave. And so this is, we even saw this with Christ. So Christ said, he said, by my name you'll cast out demons. What he did not say is, by my name you'll cast out all demons. And how do we know that? Because he also says later to the apostles, these types of demons can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. Okay, you still use Christ's name, but there's other things. Well, the authority of the church, so when Christ said to the apostles, all authority has been given to me, go therefore and baptize all nations, he deputized the apostles and gave them an authority which then is passed on to us as exorcists when we're doing that. That's how the fathers talk about this lineage of authority being passed. That authority, then the demons know that you have that authority. And if you first start out, doing a diagnostic and you're praying over somebody, if the demon manifests, he might take your beating for a little while, but then at a certain point, he's just going to say, where's your authority? This is one of the reasons why Protestants have a certain degree of efficacy by using Christ's name, because it has a force of its own. And they might even do prayer and fasting and that type of thing. But there are certain kinds of possession or certain levels of possession where they end up on our doorstep because they can't seem to get them liberated. And so that's once a priest has jurisdiction, then the demons, they don't ask where your authority is because they already know where it's from, because it's been infused in their knowledge that the bishop told you that you could do this. So you do a series of prayers which causes them pain because they have to think about those particular things, and it's against their will, contrary to their will. So what's happening is the pain in their will is starting to build. That's the whole goal, is to get it to build to where they finally give you what you need to know in order to get them out. So you go between that and then praying and asking Christ for certain things and back into that. Once the ritual's done, if you know what the particular weaknesses are of the demon, then what you'll do is you'll switch to a set of prayers or make him pray. That's one of the things I'll do is I'll force the demon, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to say, for example, one particular case, you're going to say the litany of the precious blood. And so he was forced to talk about the litany of the precious blood as a series of invocations to Christ through his precious blood about specific things like burning furnace of charity and things of that sort. So we forced him to say those particular prayers, or we'll force them to praise like Our Lady or something like that. And them having to do that, it causes them their pain to increase. And then once they get to a certain level of pain, then they're likely to give you the information. Once the session...
What information?
So the church tells you that there's essentially 5 things that you want to know. You need to know how many possessors there are, because you need to make sure that when the person's liberated, they're fully cleaned out.
So there might be multiple demons.
Yes, they have. Yeah.
What's the most you've seen?
Well, I said this one had legion, and I believe it was legion. But outside that context, the one that I've seen the most is 27.
27 demons in one human?
Yeah. And it was pretty sad case. This guy was a hurting unit, man, from all that. So most of them, though, most of them are, it's somewhere between 1 to 8, maybe, are the most is that you tend to see as a general rule. I actually did see a case where I did one case where I got rid of one demon of fear. The woman went out and did something really stupid, and then when she came back, it was literally like scripture: one leaves and seven come back, and that was literally she had seven. So, but so the number of possessors, the names, because once you know the name, there's two aspects to the name. One, it gives you an identity. So, for example, when I had Loki in a case, once the demon revealed what his name was, then I was able to actually go and research historically Loki as a Norse god, because it says right in scripture, all the gods of Gentiles are demons, and so you can actually just go and look at the worship that they used to give to Loki in the past, and to the Norse god of Loki. And what you'll find out in there is it was almost a complete description of his personality. He's a god of mischief. And so he was just such a handle to get a hold of. But once you know the name, then you can do some research, or you can ask other exorcists, have you seen this guy, etc. The second thing is the name gives you a power over them. Now, demons will either reveal their name right off the bat if it's not going to help, if it's not going to be mean that much, or they'll hold out and hold out and hold out as long as they possibly can, because once you know their name, then it gives you a certain power over them. We actually experience this as human beings. So if I call your name, hey, Sean, if you're standing over there and I say, hey, Sean, right? When it goes into your faculties and you hear it, it draws your attention. Well, it's the same thing with them. When you're using their name, it draws their attention, and they can't get their mind off of the thing that you're telling them to do. And so it gives you a power actually over them. So the names, how they got in, because a lot of times how they got in is how they're going to get out. Plus, times how they got in is very often like if it's because they were wounded very badly, like a woman was raped or something of that sort, then you maybe some psychological issues that have to be addressed first before she's going to get liberated. And then the time and date of departure when you're leaving. I don't ask that too often because they usually lie. Now, only about 10% of the time do they actually tell the truth, but they usually lie. They'll say, oh, I'm leaving tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and goes and they don't leave. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to discourage the person who's possessed. And then the last piece of information is, what is it going to take to get you out? And usually it's something very simple. So in the last case that the woman was liberated that I was working with, it took us a long time to get out this piece of information. She had to go to a specific altar in a particular church, and I had to say a specific prayer over her, and she would leave, and he would leave. We did it. Boom, he was out. But it took us a long time to get him to that point. That piece of information is what they're going to hold out. And there's 6 stages of liberation. Stage 6 is liberation. Stage 5, that last piece of information is going to come out in stage 5.
Wow. When you're talking about curses, does this play into this as well, curses? Can you ask who the curse came from?
Yes. Well, they'll often reveal it. So if the person's possessed, you'll actually, if they're not possessed, the demons can't talk necessarily. Whereas if the person's possessed, you can beat him to the surface and force him to talk, and he'll talk. And then at that point, they'll, if the person was cursed, you have to break the curse, and that's going to be how you're going to liberate them. And so as a result, the demon's going to have to tell you at some point who cursed them and how it was done. And then there's usually specific things that you can do to invert those or break the curses.
How many demons are there?
Billions, literally. So when God created all the angels, he created the entire hierarchy of angels instantaneously all at once. And so starting from the seraphim, which is at the top, all the way down to just angels at the bottom. Of the class of the angels alone, there's one subset, which is the guardian angels. And every human being that has that has basically been born or basically been conceived has had a guardian angel created specifically for that particular individual. So you're talking billions just in that one subclass. The number of angels that fell is from Book of Revelation, where Satan took a third of the stars and with his tail and swept them down. So that's the fathers say that means that a third of the angels actually fell. Now, not a third get to possess or have much to do with us in this life. Most of the possessions that we see are from the top rank, which is the top three choirs, the thrones, the cherubim, and the seraphim. So, it'd be Satan, Lucifer, and Beelzebub, but then would also be Baal, Asmodeus, Leviathan, Lilith, Baphomet, and then also Moloch. Those are the ones in the middle. There's also other ones like Abaddon, who are kind of in the middle. They're you don't see too many in the middle tier very often. And then you'll see a lot of the lower grunt guys at the bottom, whose job is to just kind of do the bidding of the guys at the top. And so those where you see most of the possessed and demons coming from.
And so when they name themselves, is this all recorded? I mean, when you're talking about billions of demons, and you get one to name itself during an exorcism, you go do some research. I mean, how many times has it been where it wasn't recorded?
Most of it, actually.
Most of it.
Yeah, because historically, to be an exorcist was done by mentorship. So what would happen is if you were chosen to be an exorcist, you would go and study under some guy for like a year to 2 years, and then he would teach you all these things, that we're talking about. And so you would learn those things, and you'd learn the names of demons, and you'd see them in session and get a sense for them before you started out on your own. But because of the number of exorcists collapsed in the church, and then now they're just trying to get it back up off the ground. We teach classes, actually. My community and I, we actually teach classes. And then there's also a place in Mundelein that teaches courses on this particular topic. And so, but then we encourage people to come and sit on session, because it's one thing for me to tell you that, oh yeah, people change shape during session, and it's another thing to actually see it and see what you're actually looking at. So, because anytime demons preternaturally manifest, there's a real revelation, something about the demon. It's called the cause is always some way in the effect. It's a philosophical principle. The cause is always some way in the effect. And so they're revealing it. So when they do those types of things, those things don't, the only thing I'm really interested in is, what am I seeing? What can I learn from what is going on in this guy? Because that information is going to tell me something about him, and it's going to be helpful for me to get him out.
But before we move into shape-shifting and that kind of stuff, I'm just curious. So would that be your responsibility to record a new name with a new personality?
So we don't necessarily record it, but we are actually in the process of building a database. So that exorcists would have access to the database, because some of the common ones like Satan, Lucifer, and those things, or even some of the more common ones like Abaddon, who's the demon of destruction, you'll get you can find out a fair amount of information about these guys. We'll put those in the database, but there's a lot of ones that are less known, and so exorcists come across them. I've come across demons that other exorcists haven't. They've come across demons that I've never even heard of, or nobody's ever even heard of. And it seems authentic, etc. So we want to get a database so that going forward, exorcists, if they come across somebody, they don't have to spend all the time doing the research. They can just quickly go take a look at the database and get a sense of, this is what the guy's weaknesses are. This is what he got out in these these cases. This is what got him out. This is his history. Because like the god of Isis or Osiris, those are Egyptian gods, but those are also demons. So if you know what those are, then you can actually, don't have to go and read a bunch of Egyptian in order to know what these guys are.
Can a demon possess multiple people at one time?
Yeah, you can. I actually had a case of that. Well, 2 cases, where the same possessor was possessing 2 sisters who were blood related. And so when we would do sessions with one, the other one would manifest from time to time outside of the session.
Holy shit! So
we had to do a lot of stuff to keep them, from what we call cross animation, which is where, when they're around each other, the demons are going to manifest. So you see that from time to time, where someone who's possessed, they'll get around someone else who's possessed, and whoever has the lower demons in them will be the one where the lowest demon will manifest in the presence of the bigger demon. but they can possess more than one. They generally can only act on one thing at a time.
Okay.
But Thomas Aquinas says that they can act on a number of different things at the same time if it all falls under the same conceptual idea. So, for example, someone can juggle where they're keeping several things in the air at once. Demons can act on, like, I'm going to act on these three people that I'm possessing because my access to them is the same. And so they can act on three people at the same time. But normally they don't do that.